Hello and welcome to South First. I am Sumit Jha. Mental health terminology has become prominent in recent discussions. However, the widespread use of terms like stress, anxiety, and depression has resulted in lack of clarity. People often use these terms interchangeably or incorrectly, leading to misunderstanding. This issue is particularly relevant as mental health awareness grows and societal conversation encourage individuals to talk more openly about their experiences. Today, we have with us psychiatrist Dr. Alok Kulkarni, with whom we are going to speak about these terminologies. Welcome, Dr. Alok. Welcome to South First.
Thank you, Sumit. Thanks for having me in.
So I'll start with a very basic question. What is mental health and where do we draw the line between mental health and mental illness?
Oh, that's a very interesting question, Sumit. It's important to get our understanding about these broad terminologies. There's no universal or one definition of mental health. Broadly, it can be conceptualized as a state of emotional, psychological, and social well-being, wherein an individual is able to meet with the day-to-day stresses and challenges, uh, contribute to some extent to one's community, maintain good interpersonal relationships, and so on and so forth. This construct of mental health exists on a complex continuum, and it varies from person to person. Mental illness, on the other hand, results in clinically significant distress,
Hmm.
functional impairment, and socio-occupational dysfunction.
Oh, so can someone experience poor mental health without having a diagnosable mental illness?
Yeah, absolutely. It is possible. For example, let's say that I am given a job and there's a deadline, and I'm going into fits of anger for no reason at all. I'm not able to cope well with the given situation. I burst out on my juniors, but there is no clinically significant distress. But clearly, I'm not able to cope with the given deadline, which is a daily say, which can be taken as a day-to-day stressor. So one can experience poor mental health
Hmm.
without necessarily having a diagnosable mental health condition.
Okay. Okay. So now I'll come to the terminologies. Stress, anxiety, depression are terms frequently used in daily conversations. How do
Right.
these terms differ clinically?
So anxiety is an apprehensive anticipation of future misfortune, which is accompanied by feelings of distress, worry, and symptoms of bodily tension.
Hmm.
From an evolutionary perspective, fear and anxiety are adaptive responses.
Okay.
It is important to differentiate uh, stress from pathological states of dysfunctional anxiety. How do we do this? Are there clinical and predictive biomarkers to do this as on today? Research is still on in this area, and there are no predictive biomarkers to differentiate stress from states of pathological dysfunctional anxiety. We do that on clinical grounds by taking into account various factors, say factors such as the duration of symptoms, intensity and severity of symptoms, uh, frequency of symptoms, disproportionality of symptoms in a given context, pervasive and persistence of these symptoms across varying contexts, and the resultant socio-occupational impairment. So clearly, it's a clinical judgment as
Okay.
on today.
Okay. And what about depression here? Because people here these days this terminology has been used quite often, and
Right.
uh, even I'm not sure that how to like people go to the doctor and just say that okay, I'm suffering from depression. So how do you see that in your clinical practice?
Right, right. So there are structured scales for assessment. There are structured rating instruments for assessment, which all mental health professionals are trained in, especially psychiatrists. Depression, as you rightly said, clinical depression is different from the way, say, somebody might use the sentence saying "I'm depressed." So, depression is a state characterized by persistent and pervasive sadness of mood, anhedonia, low energy levels, easy fatigability, disrupted biological functions, feelings of hopelessness,
Mm.
worthlessness, inappropriate guilt, crying spells, suicidal ideas, and in extreme cases, psychomotor retardation. One of the core features of depression is something called anhedonia. Hedonia refers to pleasure, and anhedonia refers to a state wherein there is loss of pleasure in activities that were once enjoyable, say watching TV, playing with one's kids, or talking to neighbors, and so on and so forth. Broadly, mood disorders are characterized by symptom disruption in three domains, and these include mood, energy levels, and activity levels. So, depression is a state where mood, energy, and activity levels are dulled. So, there are structured rating instruments available for assessment, and it is important to reach out to mental health professionals such as psychiatrists and psychologists to get the accurate diagnosis.
So as you mentioned that there is quite a lot difference between normal sadness and people feeling clinically depressed. So how can
Right.
someone identify if they need professional help for their mental disorder?
Right. So broad markers are the symptoms resulting in functional impairment.
Mm,
Is the individual incapacitated in performing day-to-day tasks?
mm.
Is it resulting in socio-occupational dysfunction? Has the individual stopped socializing? As is the individual encountering difficulties in his or her workplace? So these can be broad markers if the person is having some symptoms of anxiety, depression, etc.
Okay, so my question is again regarding the terminology. How important is it to use the correct terminology when discussing mental health? Does it impact the person or also the person who is with someone who is going through depression or some anxiety? The terminology impacts them?
I mean, using the right terminology is not as important as the discussion surrounding mental health. That's a
Okay.
welcome
Mhm.
change.
Okay.
Clearly, people are
Mm,
seeking more mental health help, given that discussions have revolved around the construct of mental health.
mm, mm.
This has served to dispel myths surrounding mental health. It has
Okay.
busted stigma surrounding mental health, and clearly awareness has gone up. In my view, in my personal view, I wouldn't stress too much on the usage of the right
Okay.
terminologies.
Mhm.
Discussion around mental health has certainly helped individuals to be more open and seeking help when it comes to their own mental health.
Okay, okay. So, what advice do you have for people who may be uncertain about the language they use when talking about their own or others' mental health? What advice would you like to give there to a person?
As I said, the terminologies can vary, the
Yeah, yeah.
use of language can vary,
Mm,
and all of this is influenced by a host of other factors.
mhm,
There are social factors, broad cultural factors. One's own environment can influence the usage
mhm,
of these terminologies, and uh, one is free to use or express distress in the language that one is comfortable in.
okay.
However, I would want to emphasize that some professionals, say mental health professionals, people who are in the media, need to be cognizant of these terminologies and maybe use them more responsibly so that it doesn't add to the already prevailing confusion.
Okay, okay. Looking to the future, do you think that these terminology, as you mentioned, will evolve further? There will be more terminology coming for describing a mental health and mental disorder. How can professional and general public stay aligned in understanding these changes? Because we have evolved over the time.
Right. So yeah, that's a given. I mean, any field evolves, and usage of terminologies will definitely change. Given that our own psychiatric classificatory systems are regularly revised, updated, usage of terminologies is bound to evolve. And the other thing is staying abreast. I mean, one can look up credible sources of information. One website that I always tell people is the World Health Organization website. It is regularly updated. So one can always look up credible sources of information to stay aligned and stay updated with the latest terminologies.
Okay. Second last question to you that this year the WHO has said that we are going to celebrate Mental Health Day on the basis of like our work ethics and work culture, what is evolving around us.
Right.
There is one particular term called burnout, which has
Right.
come recently. So, how would you
Right.
explain the term burnout? Is it considered a mental illness, or is it is it something different from your clinical practice?
Right, right. In psychiatric classificatory systems, there's no term such as burnout.
Okay.
Burnout can represent anything. It can represent stress, a state of not being emotionally well, psychologically well. So it can uh, include broader definitions.
Hmm.
Say somebody with clinically significant anxiety or depression may be experiencing burnout.
Hmm.
So the language doesn't necessarily
Okay.
matter as much while discussing all these constructs. However, it's very important that awareness is built surrounding these terms. Diagnosing clinical conditions, I think, is best left to mental health professionals who are trained, and that happens on the basis of an exhaustive clinical interview aided by structured rating instruments,
Hmm.
and if required, some investigations. It's important that awareness is increased
Hmm.
so that myths are busted and stigma is dispelled. Burnout may include various states of emotional distress, in my opinion.
Okay, okay, okay. So last question I'll come to. Over the period of time, since last 10, 12 years, the discussion around mental health has changed. Now,
Right,
okay, we have started to discuss about the mental health, and even started to give priority on a particular day and also in our daily life. What else
right.
need to be done in this?
It is important to include clinicians in these discussions so that they can add context to such discussions.
Okay.
So that I mean, you mentioned a lot about confusion regarding terminologies. A psychiatrist can add clinical context to such discussions. He or she is able to differentiate between states of stress and pathologically dysfunctional states. So it's important to include clinicians during these discussions.
Mhm.
One other thing is that a lot of time, all these discussions happen in the urban context.
Mhm.
We also need to focus our energies in the rural context. I practice in a place that is, say, I mean, where much of my practice has patients who come from rural areas. So it's also important to focus our energies in rural areas wherein more discussion needs to happen, greater awareness needs to be spread surrounding mental health. So that I would definitely consider as a key initiative that can definitely aid the already surrounding discussion about mental health. Please uh, let us all focus our discussions keeping in mind the rural areas. India, 80% of India
Yes,
lives in
rural.
rural areas. So
Yes.
much of mental health discussion is focused on urban areas. That's a welcome change. I'm not saying that we should curb down or cut down on that, but we can always be more inclusive by including rural areas as well.
Thank you, doctor, for speaking to us.
Thanks for having me here.